if you could, okay, so we're going to start with the Bava Metzia text, which is in the handout or in the link that I sent. That's from, it says Safaria source sheet, Bava Metzia 59a and Ketubot 59b to 62a. So we're going to start with the Bava Metzia text. Okay, raise your hand if you have it, just so I get a sense that at least most people have it. Okay, if you don't have it, look in the chat right now and just click on it. You don't have to do anything aside from click on it, and you should be able to see it on your screen. Okay, so the very first text from Bava Metzia, as I said earlier, it is connected to the Achnai's oven story, the one that featured Ima Shalom. It also featured Rabbi Eliezer, who was excommunicated. He was considered to be a victim of Ona'at Devarim. And as it's part of a larger context, a discussion about Ona'ah, wrongdoing with words, as well as wrongdoing with monetary and physical ways of harming other people. So in the context of talking about mistreatment and verbal mistreatment, there is a section about women. And I should say that what we're going to do today, and if you took a sneak preview at any of these text today, we're not going to be focusing so much on individual women as we had been in the past. We're going to be focusing on just women in general, only because there just aren't that many women in the Talmud whose stories are highlighted, and I got most of them in the previous classes, Yalta and Bruria, etc. So let us start on page 1. If someone can read the green text where it says Rav says, Sandy, I'm going to unmute you, Finkelstein. Okay. Whoop. Okay, can you, oh, there you go, Sandy.
Okay. Rob says, a person must always be careful about mistreatment of his wife. Since her tear is easily elicited, punishment for her mistreatment is immediate. Ooh, immediate.
That's pretty close, right? Okay, so what do we think about Rav's understanding about women just from this one statement? And Sandy, you don't have to answer it unless you want to.
Well, obviously, he reveres women, putting them on a very high, elevated very highly because of, I imagine, their role. I mean, the reason you have welcoming Ashes Chayil and the Shabbat and everything. So I imagine that because of that elevation, you don't want to make a woman, a wife, upset.
Right. You don't want to bite the hand that feeds you, I guess.
Absolutely, and cooks.
Or disrespect the one you're supposed to be respecting. Does anyone else have anything to add about this? Either reading it the same way, a different way, elaborating upon it. Gail, looks like you have your hand up, kind of. Gail? No? Okay, Risa? You're muted.
Women, I think he thinks women are somewhat emotional because since her tear is easily elicited.
Okay, so is that a good thing or a bad thing, do you think, from Rob's perspective?
I'm not sure. I think it's a statement of fact that they're emotional, and I guess it's a bad. I don't know. You don't want to make her cry, but it's easily done. But I also get the feeling also that mistreatment does happen, and therefore you have the warning. You have to be careful about mistreatment of your wife. You're going to mistreat her, but be careful about it because you're going to get punished afterwards.
Okay, so watch out.
Yeah.
Right. I'll take one more comment on this Rav statement, and then I'm going to just add a commentary by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, and then move on to the other texts. Anyone else want to say something about this text, the Rav text? Okay, I don't see any hands, so I'm just going to read. Oh, wait, Bonnie, go ahead. You need to unmute yourself. Bonnie left.
Hi. I mean, I've listened to this now with several comments, and why does it think that every woman is so close to tearing up? It sort of positions women to be very fragile. I just think that some of us are a little bit tougher than that sometimes. I think it depends on the day.
Depends on the day and depends on how verbally mistreated we are.
Right.
What form of verbal
What did he say?
Yeah, exactly. So let me read to you what Rabbi Steinsaltz says. Rabbi Steinsaltz writes, and this is in his translation and commentary on the Talmud of Bava Metzia. He has Hebrew translations as well as English, and he writes here, even though God punishes all people who sin, God answers immediately the cries of those who demand divine intervention and punishment, including women who are more sensitive to insult than men. Okay, so that's like turns on its head what you just said, Bonnie, but kind of supports what Lisa said. But then he goes on to say, in addition, people are more likely to quarrel with their wives than with other women. And it should also be noted that people are more apt to try to treat their wives disrespectfully than they would other women. So what do you think about that one? Does that sound more feminist, less feminist, more understanding of women, or more clueless from your own experience? Laura, you need to unmute yourself. Laura?
Yes, I think I did. I just think that people in general, not just men, are on their best behavior in public, but at home sort of let their guard down. So it might be true of men, but it also might be true of women, that they might say things to their husbands that they might not say in public to other strangers.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's something astute about that. I think by framing what you said, that it's not just a woman thing, it's a people thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in public, we somehow have a little bit more self-control than we might on average at home. All right, so we're going to go back to the text, and I'm going to skip the next part, the one that says Rabbi Elazar says. Rabbi Elazar, the reason I'm skipping it, not because it's not important, but because it's not particularly specific to women. And skip now to page 2 of the handout, if you will. And it's another Rav statement, okay? So this is, it's in red. And would someone like to read that? Judy?
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Oh, okay. And Rav said, nevertheless, there?
Yep.
Okay. And Rav says, nevertheless, anyone who follows the counsel of his wife descends into Gehenna, as it is stated. But there was none like Ahab, who did himself over to do that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, whom Jezebel, his wife, incited.
Okay, so this is the same Rav. It's not two different Ravs. Well, there are some rabbis whose names sound the same. In particular, I'm studying Daf Yomi, and on yesterday's page there was Rava and Rabba, one end with an aleph, one with a hey, and even the Gemara made mistakes, and there's text emendations, but here it is. It's the same guy. They both lived in the 3rd century, prominent between the years 220 and 250 CE. And what Rav is saying here, how does that jive with what Rav said earlier? So the red text of Rav on page 2 compared to the green text of Rav on page 1.
He listened to her.
Okay. Well, in terms of, because he's not just talking about what he did, he's giving advice. So a lot of what we're seeing here in this part of the Talmud, it's kind of laws, customs, truisms, rabbis' random thoughts about the way people are, in this particular case, women. So, like I said, we're not sure what he exactly did with his wife. Hopefully he followed his own advice. But what is he saying here? So go on that track, Judy, with what you were saying.
Okay. Well, I got to get back to I can't see I wish I had printed it out. I couldn't get it to print out.
Okay. So does someone else want to answer this question while you're looking? Yes, Beth, go ahead.
So I actually think that the focus of his first statement is really about the punishment for doing it rather than the sort of the doing it part. And then it makes perfect sense what he says afterwards, which is, oh, and by the way, if you listen too closely to your wife, you're going to hell.
Right, which is also a punishment, yeah?
Yes, yes. But I think then he like gives a proof text for why, in fact, that's true. But I really think that I think the first part wasn't about him being nice to his wife, but more avoiding the punishment of not being nice to his wife.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So think of it, the motivations for our own behavior, right? What works better, a carrot or a stick? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Thanks, Beth. Phyllis, did you want to say something? No. I see. Denise, did you want to say something? No. Sandy Tillis?
I'm thinking that he's saying to be careful. Don't hurt your wife. Don't hurt her emotionally, of course, and in any way. Don't hurt her. But also be careful when she gives you advice.
Meaning not to follow it necessarily, or think before.
Well, as in any other case, you need to use discretion when following somebody's advice in case they're giving you advice that would send you to hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Something like that. Okay. Risa, go ahead. Risa, okay. Can't hear you, Risa.
I'm sorry. I don't think he particularly values women's emotional state or their thinking. They tear up easily in the first one. And in the second one, it's don't listen or you're going to go to hell. The wife does not give good counsel. The wife is not a equal intellectual partner or emotional partner. I think it's a negative view of women.
And what do you think about the proof text? Beth used the term proof text, and this proof text here is from the book of Malach.
Jezebel. I mean, she had her own ulterior motives, and she definitely made her husband do bad things. But I don't think that's the proof text. I mean, I don't think that's all women. That was Jezebel.
Yeah, and we all know about Jezebel and Betty Davis. Yeah. Okay, so now just one other thing I just wanted to comment on this Rav piece. You on the one hand, it looks like they're contradicting each other because one is a more positive view of women, sort of, at least be careful about her feelings. Now, several of you have pointed out that makes women look so fragile, right? So maybe that's not such a positive view of women, the first comment. The second comment, you could still be careful about not to upset your wife and at the same time not take advice from her. So you could view possibly the first comments of Rav more positively about women, the second one more negatively, or view them both negatively. Is there any way to view both of them positively? I'm not sure, but let's look at the next rabbi who's quoted. It's Rav Papa. Rav Papa lived in a different generation. He lived in the 4th century. Both of them lived in Babylonia. So Rav lived in the 3rd century. Rav Papa lived in the 4th century. A lot of the conversation on the pages of the Talmud were not actual conversations between people sitting in a room or even in, like, certainly not a virtual context like this. They didn't even live at the same time. But the feeling about Gemara, and what I love about Gemara, is that you're able to engage in this conversation. And this is implicit invitation to have these conversations like that we're having, because they had conversations with each other even though they didn't live at the same time. So who would like to read Rav Papa? Rav Papa's talking to Abaye. So do I see a hand? Judy, would you like to read?
Okay. Rav Papa said to Abaya, but don't people say a popular proverb? If your wife is short, stoop and whisper to her and consult with her.
Stop right there. Okay. This is a very common Talmud thing where you have one rabbi who quotes Torah or Tanakh in this case, so not necessarily from the 5 books of the Torah. You had that quote from Rav, and that's considered a very hefty proof. But then others just say, forget the biblical text. What do people say? There's a common saying out there that everyone knows, and of course we're all very familiar with the Aramaic itatach gutza gachin v'til choshla, right? You all know that one by heart. I'm sure you have a kitchen magnet that says just that, but they did possibly in those days, and or the equivalent thereof. And so Rav Papa is going in direct contradiction with Rav. Both of them are talking about taking advice from your wife and whether you should or you shouldn't. So who do you think has it kind of gets women better, or at least has a better attitude towards women, Rav Papa or Rav, in your opinion?
Rav Papa.
Right. So it's kind of, sure, because any of us who are married, like, we like to think that no matter how short we are, whether we're physically shorter than our husbands or just smaller, lesser education in the case of the rabbis in the days of the Talmud, you could still learn something valuable from everybody, and you should listen to your wife. And women have a lot of valuable things to say, particularly your wife. And then the Gemara goes on this same page, on page 2 of the handout, where it says in black, the Gemara answers, this is not difficult. So they're saying in Hebrew, or it's Aramaic actually, la kashya. It's not a kasha. Have you heard of the term kasha, like the fear kashas? Right. So what are the fear kashas? Does anyone want to say what those are? You don't have to list them, but like what?
Passover.
Yeah. So what does it mean though? What is that term?
Four questions.
Means the 4 questions. So kasha is a question. It actually comes from the word kasher, which means difficult. So a difficulty, it's not so much what color is the sky. It's more like, I read in this book that the sky was blue, and I read in this other book that the sky is green. That doesn't make sense. Those 2 statements contradict each other. How do I reconcile that contradiction? So that's what la kasha is in the Talmud. How could it be? Rav says, don't take advice from your wife. And Rav Papa says, do take advice from your wife. How do we reconcile these 2 that seem to say completely opposite things? There's a difficulty. So the Gemara answers, this is not difficult, as this statement of Rav instructs that one not follow her counsel in general matters, milei d'alma, and that proverb instructs that one follow her counsel in household matters. And then they go on and say the Gemara presents another version of this distinction that's on the next page. This statement of Rav maintains that one should not follow her counsel in divine matters. And that proverb, meaning the other rabbi, Rav Papa, maintains that one should follow her counsel in general matters, milei d'alma. So they use the term milei d'alma in different ways in these 2 parts of the statement. Let's take the first part of the statement first, the one on page 2. So what is this? We're not really sure who to attribute this to. It's the stum, silent voice, anonymous voice in the Talmud trying to say, well, Rav says don't follow your wife's advice because in these particular situations, but you should follow your wife's advice in these situations. So therefore, no difficulty, la kasha, no contradiction between what Rav says and Rav Papa says. So what does that mean in terms of following her counsel in general matters, but not following her counsel in general matters, and do follow her counsel in household matters? What's a general matter that at least according to the Gemara, they think that wives should not be entrusted, or men should not be seeking advice from their wives about these type of things? What's a general matter?
Money, politics.
Yeah, the traditional stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And household matters would be
Children, groceries, laundry.
Not necessarily in that order, right? Okay. What about the second understanding of resolving the difficulty? That you should not follow her counsel in divine matters. That's what Rav is talking about. But that Rav Papa, who says that you should follow her counsel in general matters, what does this mean? Because here general matters seems to mean something different. And in this case, it seems like general matters is something that you are supposed to take the wife's advice about. So what do you think the distinction is between divine matters and general matters?
Mm-hmm.
Laura?
Okay. Well, I think divine matters to me means matters relating to religious observances, and general matters is everything else.
Yeah, and general matters, according to Rabbi Steinsaltz, Dean Steinsaltz, his commentary says he actually defines general matters in this second clause here as domestic matters. So some of the things you mentioned before about children and laundry and groceries, that before we were looking at that as those are things you should, it's household, it's very specific to household matters. Here, Rabbi Steinsaltz is understanding general matters to be domestic matters. Mm-hmm. And in those other things, politics, religion, stuff like that, don't even bother. Don't take your women's advice, because not only will it not be helpful, but you might end up in Gehenna, the Jewish version of hell.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes, please.
The divine, just thought occurred to me that the idea of divine matters as opposed to general. Divine is more like spiritual or ideas or philosophical, whereas the other one, general, is like more mundane, everyday life kind of thing.
Yeah, and do you think, and this could be for Laura or anybody else, do you think it's because the perception is that women just didn't understand these things, or they weren't exposed to these things, or they didn't have enough knowledge or experience. It's clearly a slam on women, but what kind of slam? Yes, go ahead, Betty Ann.
Rabbi, I don't know how to get the pictures of people back. I'm on the chat.
Okay, so you go to the top, on the top bar, there's like a little thing, it looks like Urim V'Tumim, like the breastplate of the Kohen, the dots, and you click on that, you can go from speaker view to other views.
I'm not getting that. Anyway, what I wanted to say is, I had read somewhere that women are born with all the knowledge about the Torah, all of the books. They knew all of that already. And that's why they didn't have to study. And that's why the men have to study. So if the women know all of this already, then why can't they be counselor on divine matters?
Well, I'm not familiar with the text that you're talking about. It sounds like apologetics to me. That's I have read and I've seen coming out of Chabad and other places, not only from men, but from women as well, who are involved with this, who say that women are more spiritual, not necessarily more knowledgeable, but there's like an inherent spirituality that women have, and therefore they don't need to be bogged down with all this study. So it's not so much that they know, it's that they feel they connect to God. They don't need all this knowledge base.
Well, I'll tell you where I read it. I read it in a book in a gynecologist's office in Lakewood, New Jersey.
Okay.
Which was very interesting.
Okay. Next time you go back there, take a picture on your phone of the source so we can figure out what the source. It may have been written by just some guy or woman, but let's see.
I don't think it was written by a woman. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, women do write this. I mean, it's not just men who write this. Okay, Betty Ann, you were going to speak next?
It appears to me that no matter which paragraph is read, that the men are just perpetuating the fact that there is a control over women. And there's every excuse of why you should do something or not to at least acknowledge they're there. But it sounds very much like this just perpetuates the idea of what they are living and what goes on, and they can prove it by using the Gemara.
So Betty Ann, on that note, do you want to read the next text on the bottom of page 3? It's still part of Bava Metzia. It's Rabbi Chelbo.
Rabbi, I'm sorry, I'm lost here. I didn't know whether to click the first one or the second one, and I don't know.
All right, so we'll have someone else read, but there's 2 clicks. One says Love Babylonian Style. We're not on that one yet. We're on the Safari of source sheet.
That's the one I should be on?
No, we're on the first one, Safari of source sheet. And if you click on that, you have to scroll up to page 3. Would someone who has it like to read it? Laura, go ahead.
All right, page 3 of 30.
Yeah, Laura's going to read it while you're looking for it, okay? You'll do another read later. Okay, go ahead, Laura.
And Rabbi Chelbo says, a person must always be careful about sustaining the honor of his wife, as blessing is found in a person's house only because of his wife, as it is stated in allusion to this. And he dealt well with Avram for her sake, and he had sheep and oxen. And that is what Rava said to the residents of Mechotza, where he lived. Honor your wives so that you will become rich.
Okay, any comments on that one? Are we getting in a more positive direction, less positive? I see Sandy Finkelstein's doing something over there. Anyone love this statement, hate this statement, have something else to say about this statement? Laura, go ahead.
Well, I can't help, forgive me, as a math teacher, this statement, I can't help but think that if this is true, the contrapositive is also true, which means if you don't become rich, don't honor your wife. So it disturbs me.
Okay, so how does that work mathematically, the contrapositive?
Well, if it's really an if-then, sort of an implied if-then statement. If you honor your wife, then you will become rich. If that's a true statement, then its contrapositive is also true. The contrapositive is the negation of the, it's an if then, the part after the then, if you negate that, then the negation of the conditional is also true. Anyway, the point is, forgive me, it's hard to explain without a chalkboard. I'm going back. But my point is that this statement, if you agree that this statement is true, then that contrapositive also has to be true, which is very disturbing.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, who's talking now?
Judy?
Oh, hi, Judy. Go ahead. So did you want to say something else?
Oh, well, I was just agreeing with Laura because that logic is for sure correct. And I'm sure a lot of men feel that way.
Yeah.
I'm not.
The proof text that's here, the one from Genesis, Bereshit, it mentions Avram. He's talking about his wife. So does anyone know what the context is? It's in Parshat Lech Lecha. Go ahead, Beth.
Isn't that when he convinced the Pharaoh that that Sarah was his sister?
Yeah. And then what happens?
And then Pharaoh takes her, and then things don't go well, and then he pays off Avram to take her back and get the heck out of town.
Yeah, get out of Dodge, Avram. Why didn't you tell me she was your sister? If she was your wife, I knew she was your wife, then I wouldn't have approached her.
I would have killed you.
And I would have killed you. So you definitely have this sense of Avram as being very self-serving. Like he does end up with a lot. But here, this text is used in a positive way. Like if not for Sarah, Abraham would have had nothing, right? So like you need to give credit where credit is due, and you need to honor your wife. So we started out with don't mistreat your wife. Then there was a statement about whether or not you should take advice from your wife. And then we've moved to, if you honor your wife, which is like goes beyond even mistreatment and taking advice from her. But if you show her great honor will be bestowed upon you, not just in a spiritual sense, but also in a monetary sense. So
can I just
yes, Beth, go ahead.
So to me, the Talmud, like my takeaway from the Talmud is usually, I'm so curious about like what's driving the conversation. And so it's so interesting to me because the rabbis wouldn't have talked about this in any generation or had these conversations with each other when some were alive and some were dead if this wasn't an ongoing issue within the community.
Right.
And it's so fascinating to me because I think to myself, okay, so men were not honoring their wives, and the rabbis are really coming at it. They're really trying to sort of come at it from so many different ways so that one of those ways will speak to a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like some are going to say, oh, the rabbi says I need to honor my wife so I can become rich. But another one's like, whatever. But I can't stand watching my wife cry because it makes me even crazier. So I'm gonna, and I don't want to be punished. So I'm gonna go with that one. So it's a really fascinating conversation just in general about it, a real commentary on the times, which by the way is sort of not just about Jews, but about all the peoples in these time frames and the way that men treated women. And I think what I appreciate about these conversations between the rabbis is that they're at least trying to figure out a way to get it to stop, as opposed to just like saying, oh, well, it just is what it is, and let's just move on.
Yeah, I mean, they clearly are dealing with it. And because, I don't know if you noticed, I put the text in red and green because red is kind of more negative, green is more positive. Oh, that's my way of color coding my life here. And I think there was an ambivalence and a tension between those two poles. And clearly they could have put together the whole Talmud with just laws that related to religious matters. They didn't have to have this discussion. The fact that they are sharing it, as Beth pointed out, this was an issue they were struggling with. There was a real issue, whether it was women are complaining or men noticed it, or maybe these same men who are husbands were also fathers. So maybe they were not so self-aware when they were just married and had young kids at home, but once their daughters got older, maybe they saw the daughters' husbands not treating them so well. So maybe that was part of the reality too. And then when it's your daughter that's being mistreated, then all of a sudden you might have an awareness of, this is not the way men are supposed to be treating their wives. So who knows what drove it, but clearly it states and it reflects the mood of the time, and that this was something they were dealing with. We did mention about this last part about the giving honor to women. some of you may have been on the class. I think many of you were, I think it was the second class of this series where I taught about Yalta. And Yalta was the wife of Rav Nachman. She was the one who was given the cup of blessing, or her husband wanted the cup of blessing to be passed to her. This was the one from Masechet Brachot, from Tractate Brachot 51b. And Ula did not want to pass the cup of blessing to her. And Rav Nachman says, in my house, the wife gets this honor. It's a particular honor at the end of a meal for the wife to get this cup of blessing. And what does Yalta do when Ula does not pass her the cup of blessing, when he does not show her respect, and he actually is very disrespectful to her? She breaks all those wine bottles, right? Which we read at the time as either she was being hysterical, and that's not such a positive view of women, or she was making a point, saying, you want wine in my house? You got to show me some respect. And showing me disrespect is showing disrespect to my entire household, not just to me as an individual. So this issue clearly there was a tension in those times. And we're not just talking about the famous rabbis and their wives, but every household had a wife and husband situation that maybe there were issues surrounding these kind of relationships. So we're going to move now to the next section that's in that same handout. It's page 8 in the handout. We're moving to a different tractate of the Talmud. We're moving from Bava Metzia, which is where the Ima Shalom story was and all of this that we just did. And then now we're moving to Ketubot. Ketubot is the plural of the word ketuva or ketuba. Ketuba is a wedding contract. So the basis of this tractate, at least the starting point, is about the wedding document, but then it becomes more about the wedding and women. And in fact, the Seder, the order of the Talmud that this is in, is called Nashim. So this section that I pulled here, we're not going to do the whole thing because it's very detailed. There's a whole spiel here about women and their obligations. Wait, let me just get the right page. I think I went too far. I did. Yeah, I'm talking about actually the bottom of page 4 is where I want to be. It's a Mishnah, and it's talking about wife's responsibilities to her husband. And one of the many things they're going to be talking about here is nursing. So would someone like to read this Mishnah on Ketubot 59b? It's at the bottom of page 4. Beth, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. The Mishnah mentions among a wife's obligations that she nurses.
Go back. I made a mistake in the page number. I want you to go to the Mishnah. What you're reading already is Gemara on that Mishnah. So page 4 of the handout. So just scroll back a little. It's text number 2.
4 in the handout.
Yeah, it's text number 2.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
Mishnah, yeah.
And these are tasks that a wife must perform for her husband. She grinds wheat into flour and bakes and washes clothes, cooks and nurses her child, makes her husband's bed, and makes thread from wool by spinning it. If she brought him one maidservant, i.e. brought the maidservant with her into the marriage, the maidservant will perform some of these tasks. Consequently, the wife does not need to grind and does not need to bake and does not need to wash clothes. If she brought him 2 maids, she does not need to cook and she does not need to nurse her child if she does not want to, but instead may give the child to a wet nurse. If she brought him 3 maids, and she does not need to make his bed and does not need to make thread from wool. If she brought him 4 maids, she may sit in a chair like a queen and not do anything, as her maids do all of her work for her.
Okay, let's end with Rabbi Eliezer as well.
Rabbi Eliezer says, even if she brought him 100 maids, he can still compel her to make thread from wool, since idleness leads to licentiousness. Consequently, it is better for a woman to be doing some kind of work, even if she has a maid. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, even one who vows that his wife is prohibited from doing any work must divorce her and give her the payment for her marriage contract, since idleness leads to shi'amum.
Yeah, which I translate, the way it was translated in Safari was idiocy. I've seen it also translated as insanity. I've also seen it translated as boredom. So there's a big difference between boredom and insanity, but somehow it's some negative consequence that could come about from idleness. So before we get to the Rabbi Eliezer and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel statements, because that's a discussion in and of itself, let's just look at this whole spiel about the maids. Okay, so how many of you brought 4 maids into your marriage? Right. Okay. Right. Sounds like fantasy, right? So what's the whole purpose of having this whole spiel about the maids? Like what is the Gemara trying to get at here? In general, does a wife have responsibilities to her husbands, or in Talmudic times, did the rabbis perceive wives as having these obligations? All wives, depending on what? Risa, go ahead, and then Anne.
Well, it would seem that wives have certain responsibilities, but if you're really wealthy, you can have some other people do it. Just like today, we don't necessarily all clean our own houses. We hire somebody to do it. So in that case, you had the maid living with you and they do some of the work, but they're also saying that you can't just be idle. You can't just be the housewife of the 50s who sit around and drink because they are bored out of their minds. So yeah, yes, if you have a maid, it's a good thing up to a point, but too much of a good thing can be bad.
Okay, Anne, did you want to add something to that?
Well, this implies this is a dowry situation where the wife is bringing maids. What if the husband is wealthy? Why can't he bring the maids? Or is that, this is whole thing is, what did the woman bring to the marriage here?
Right, so it's a dowry thing. And if you notice, just even with the numbers, it starts out with this list of 7, that these are 7 things that women, say, of limited means had to do. But if you brought in one wife, well, the list goes, -3, then it goes, -5, -7. But there is an expectation, if you don't have maids, that for sure you have to bring these. So women who were of limited financial means were definitely at a disadvantage in terms of what the expectations were. So I'm now going to throw out a question. You don't have to, wait, Myrna, why don't you say what you want to say? And then I'll say.
Okay. I have a question about what Gamliel is saying. Even one who vows that his wife is prohibited from doing work must divorce her. Why must he divorce her?
Because what use is she? I mean, I don't mean to be crude, but there's definitely this stuff, there's this whole idea of marriage there was definitely a transactional aspect to it, as well as possibly romantic, spiritual, all the different things where people get married in the first place, but very much of it is transactional. In fact, even the ketubah itself, we think of a ketubah as like a nice, pretty thing that hangs on your wall, or maybe a pretty, not so pretty thing it's in your drawer, but something that someone had to sign in order for you to be considered married. But a ketubah was actually an insurance policy for women, because women were considered to belong to or be part of their father's household. Then when they got married, they were part of their husband's household. And the ketubah was an insurance policy basically saying to a woman, okay, if your husband, who you now love, and he loves you, everything looks great and rosy, but if he divorces you, or if he dies, God forbid, this is the money you're entitled to. So that's why there's money amounts in a ketubah. It's saying this is your insurance policy. This is the payoff if your husband dies or divorces you. So when we hear divorce, it sounds like a negative thing. But in the Talmud, sometimes when they're talking about divorce, sometimes it's because this is what you're good for and you're not needed anymore, so he can get someone else. But some of it is also like being divorced was considered, I wouldn't say a coveted thing, but from a financial standpoint, divorced women had a lot of power. They were the ones who had money. The married women, not so much. The women who were single and living in their parents' house, not so much. So I know it's a very different mindset than what we're used to seeing and understanding about divorce. Beth, go ahead.
I guess I was looking at this in a little different way, in that it seems to me not so much about sort of the man, but more about the woman, that a woman that comes into a marriage that is wealthy enough to bring 4 maids probably never did a day of work in her life. And so all of a sudden she's coming into a marriage, and all of a sudden, there's all these requirements. A, she doesn't know how to do anything. And B, she's going to be incredibly unhappy because it's not the standard of living that she's used to. And so to me, it actually goes back to more, happy wife, happy life kind of thing, where
okay.
I don't want to make my incredibly wealthy bringing 4 maids wife unhappy in the marriage. But then you to get into the whole idea of, but this idleness can definitely be a detriment to her, which I totally understand and agree with. But I was sort of thinking of it more around caring for a woman and her and what her life was before and now what it is. I mean, it's like if you marry a pauper, like you're really wealthy as a woman and you marry a pauper, and all of a sudden he comes home and says, you have to grind the wheat. I mean, she's honestly gonna look at him like, are you out of your mind? I'm not
Right.
doing it. So I think to me there was that aspect.
So actually, since you mentioned that, I'm going to have us all go to scroll ahead or flip ahead to page 18, because it actually addresses this point that Beth mentioned. Actually, go back to page 17. So it's in the middle of a whole nursing discussion, but they do end up getting to this, what do you do if they're from different socioeconomic status, and how do you deal with that? So I'm going to read on the bottom of page 17. Okay. He then narrowed this, okay, so in the middle, actually, I'll say, however, if he says that he wants her to nurse and she says she does not want to nurse, what is the halacha? What's the law? He then narrowed the scope of the question. Anywhere that she is not accustomed, as the women of her family generally do not nurse their children, but give them to wet nurses instead, that would be a wealthier family, right? We go according to her desires. However, if she is accustomed to nursing and he is not accustomed, that is, the women of her family generally nurse their babies, but the women in his family do not, what is the halacha? Do we follow his wishes to follow her family custom, or do we follow her wishes to follow his family custom? And then now on page 18, and he answered this question from this Amoraic statement. An Amoraic statement means a statement that was written at the time of the rabbis who were known as Amoraim. Amoraim are the Gemara rabbis, year 200 to 500, the Tanaim were 0 to 200. So this is the Amoraic statement. Ole imo ve'ina yoredet imo. When a woman marries a man, she ascends with him to his socioeconomic status, if it is higher than hers, but she does not descend with him if his status is lower. Okay, so what Beth was just saying about the grinding, she was not used to grinding wheat with her hands or making the flour. She's not obligated to then go to this lower socioeconomic status expectation of what women are supposed to do. Consequently, but here in this context, they're just talking about nursing. Consequently, if his family is not accustomed to nurse, she is not obligated to nurse either. Okay, and here I guess again they're viewing nursing as something that like women of more limited means were used to doing, whereas people who were wealthier, who could afford to hire a wet nurse, they would not nurse. And so Rav Huna said, what is the verse? What's the biblical verse from which this is derived? It is derived from Vihi Beulat Baal. She is a man's wife. The Gemara explains the word used here for the wife of Beulat, hence through similar spelling, comes from the same word aliyah, la'alot, that she ascends in status with the ascension, with the aliyah of her husband, but she does not descend with the descent of her husband. And Rabbi Elazar said there's a hint to this principle from here. He gives another pasuk. This is from Bereshit Gimel, Genesis 3, talking about Adam and Eve. Ki hi haita em kol chai. She was the mother of all living things. That's how when Chava was given her name. In the beginning of the Adam and Eve story, she's not called Eve. She's just called woman, Isha, and then she becomes Chava. Chava comes from the same word as Chai. And here, ki hi em kol chai, which indicates that she was given to her husband for living with him, Chaim, but was not given to suffer pain with him. So no tsuris, just Chaim. So meaning good things going up in status, but not down in status. So that potentially might deal with what you mentioned, Beth, with certain of the household tasks like grinding wheat, which I don't think any of us are expected to do nowadays, I hope. But here they were specifically talking about nursing. Does anybody else want to have a comment? And then I'll actually have you go back to where we were. I know I had you skip all the way ahead, but I do want to go to page 7. Okay. Anyone have a comment on what I just read about the going up in status and not going down in status? And what that tells us about the rabbi's views of women or about their wives? Betty Ann? Can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Betty Ann, we can't hear you, but I'm trying to unmute you and it's not working. Lower left-hand part of the screen, there's a little microphone.
Okay. Before you read that part, when we were reading the other one, at the very end, it says the husband can still compel the wife. And the word was compel. I don't know if there's any other meaning, but it shows you the strength of what the husband can do. And what you read just followed suit with that.
Okay, now compel, I don't think, I mean, this is not my understanding of this Gemara and the commentaries I've read. We're not talking about physical abuse to compel her to do something, although I'm sure there are many men who do or could possibly view this text as permission to compel in any way. But that, I don't think that was the original intention. And compel could be just by force of his personality, his power, his position in the household, the fact that he had the money and she didn't, right, that kind of thing. So thank you for pointing that out. Okay, anybody else want to say something? It's a question to put out there. You don't have to answer it because it's personal. When you went, if any of you are married or were married, when you went into your marriage, were there certain expectations of things that you were supposed to do as a wife? You know, and
Yes.
yeah, I mean, you know, you could also ask the question the other way. Was the husband obligated or expected to do certain things? In today's day and age, I think more people have those discussions before marriage. Maybe in the Talmud, not so much. And who knows if there were as many expectations, if any, on the man as there were on the woman. I'm sure there were, but not in this domain, because clearly women were masters of the house in the sense of mavens on domestic matters. Anyone else want to make a comment on this before we move ahead? No. Okay, all right, so go to page 7. And this is text number 4. We're still on Ketubot 59b. And this is a Gemara commentary on that Mishnah, that very long thing that was read before I read the commentary on the nursing. That was all in the Mishnah, written between 0 and 200. Now we're into Gemara commentary. And the Gemara comments, someone like to read this? The Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Chia. The part right after that, Myrna, go ahead.
The Gemara comments, the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Chia, as Rabbi Chia teaches a wife is only for beauty and a wife is only for children but not for household tasks. And Rabbi Chia teaches a wife is only for wearing a woman's finery.
Okay, stop right there.
Okay.
So I think, I'm not sure how you reacted, but when I first saw that list of 7 household tasks, I was like, oy, you know, that seemed pretty negative. Anything that like gets a woman out of household tasks and that's approved by the Jewish law system sounds to me like a good thing. But here they're kind of going in this direction of, okay, she's not made for household tasks. She shouldn't be messing up her pretty little hands with that stuff because she's for beauty and she's for children. So she still has utilitarian value, but it's not about being a workhorse in the house. It's more about, I don't know, I guess trophy wife, or I don't know. It's very hard. I know some of this is very hard to read as a modern 21st century woman and seeing this. But as Beth mentioned earlier, there is some value in studying this because we get to see a little bit of the reality of what the rabbis were dealing with and what husbands and wives were dealing with, and women in general, how to deal with women, what was definitely on their mind, and they didn't ignore it. In fact, they had a whole seder, a whole order of the Talmud was all about women, and this tractate on Ketubot that ventures into all kind of things that go even beyond the Ketubah. Okay, I want us to now go ahead to the nursing piece. Okay, the nursing piece is very long, so we're not going to do the whole spiel. But on page 8, if you look at text 5, there's a debate between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel about whether or not a husband can make his wife nurse or not, whether he can compel her. There's that word again, Betty Ann. The word that's used in the Hebrew is kofeh or kofimoto. It comes from the same word as kippah, which is like a covering. So it's like, I guess, coerce, like putting pressure on, not in a physical way, but making her nurse. So we may have very mixed feelings about that. There's even a debate about, here, let me just find it. Okay, on page 8, if someone would read, if a woman took a vow not to nurse her child. So it's the bottom of page 8, and it's Ketubot 59b. So Anne, would you like to read it? Oop. I think I keep pressing on mute. While
Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop.
Okay,
doing
got
that.
it.
Okay.
Okay. If a woman took a vow not to nurse her child, according to Beit Shammai, since she vowed, she must remove, oh, good. She must remove her nipple from his mouth and not nurse him. According to Beit Hillel, her husband can compel her. She must nurse the child even against her will. However, if she was divorced and therefore had no further obligations to her husband, he cannot compel her. Nevertheless, the baby recognized her, and even after the divorce, her husband may pay her salary as a wet nurse and compel her to nurse due to the danger that the child will starve if he refuses to nurse from another woman. This
Okay.
baraita, continue?
Yeah.
This baraita indicates that according to Beit Shammai, woman has no obligation to nurse her child. She had a prior obligation to her husband to nurse the child. The vow would not take effect.
Okay, so I know this whole concept of making vows is a little foreign to us, but this, again, it's a personal question that you don't have to answer, but let me just throw it out there. In families where women nurse, was that a decision solely of the woman, or was it a decision of the woman and the husband? Is there such a case? Are there marriages where the husband feels really strongly in favor of it and the woman is against it, or vice versa? And how do you have those conversations? I know when I gave birth to my first child, to Ariel, I was living in San Francisco, and there's very, I don't know if it's peer pressure, but societal pressure in San Francisco. The assumption is that you're going to be nursing your child unless you're a negligent mother. And so it's almost like not a decision to be made. And when we took our Lamaze classes and child rearing and whatever classes you take that are supposed to somehow make you into a better parent, since kids don't come with instruction manuals, the assumption definitely was cloth diapers, nurse your child, and don't circumcise them. Like all that was like part of like the San Francisco package of kind of things to do if you're a good human being. And with the nursing thing, I mean, I'll just be honest with you. I had a very, very tough time nursing when I had Ariel. And I remember being at a La Leche League counselor on the morning of his bris because I was in tears from mastitis and being told, you know, work through it, you got to do this. And I know people feel very strongly about and against nursing in different ways. And I did end up nursing Ariel, and all worked out fine. And then Eva came along, and it actually was much easier. And then I went back to work when she was like 6 months old, and I was stuck in an airport somewhere, and my pump broke, and I had problems all over again. And I kept thinking, oh yeah, and my husband over the phone is telling, I remember him saying to me, being very supportive, which I appreciated, you know, you don't have to do this. This was your decision to make. And I just kept thinking like, wow, what, like, could there be such a case of like a husband saying, come on, you can push through this. Like, it's one thing having a La Leche League counselor say that to you. It's another thing to have your husband say that to you. And then I have to say, like, I admit when by the time I had Rivka, and I was now on the East Coast, and there wasn't as much societal pressure to nurse, but certainly in my circle, most women were nursing their children. I remember saying, but when I was pregnant, I am not nursing this one. No one can make me. I'm not in San Francisco anymore, and it was so painful, and I know it's good for the baby, but like, I can't be a good mother if I'm in pain all the time. And I was so kind of dead set on not nursing. And then I unfortunately got very sick after I gave birth, and I had to be separated from Rivka, and she was at home, and I had to be brought to the hospital. I had some kind of sepsis thing that was bad, and I was not allowed to nurse. And I remember getting so indignant. Don't tell me you guy can't nurse. I want to, you know, if I'm going to not nurse, it's going to be my decision. I think women are very protective of their own bodies and those kind of decisions. Here, it's very interesting to read that in the days of the Talmud, that there was even a discussion about having different opinions about nursing within a family. And it seems a little more palatable when you hear a husband saying, oh, honey, you don't have to nurse, and she decides to, versus, I don't want to nurse, says the woman, and the husband says, but you have to, right? Like, it just seems like it's her body. So it's a very complicated issue, and I think it's, I don't know if I want to say bravo to the rabbis for addressing it, or shame on them for going into this crazy territory. So I don't know if any of you have any nursing stories or any comments you want to make on the Hillel Shammai thing. Judy?
I'm unmuted. I nursed my children, not for as long as my daughter nursed her son, but a dear friend of mine who lives out in LA, so I can identify with that, who's a she had her own clinic where she trained some doctors about nursing and the importance. So I'm going to send her this. I'm sure she's heard these discussions, but in case she hasn't, she'll be very happy about it because she's been on the lecture circuit about the importance of nursing for generations already. So I understand the California side of the story here.
Yes, it's really something. Oh, I see. Sandy, did you want to say something? Tillis?
No, I didn't. My husband's just helping me turn the sound down.
Okay. He's like, there's too much discussion about nursing here. This is like, hurts my ears. Okay, Beth, go ahead.
So I think it's really interesting, this whole concept that they took a vow. I mean, there weren't too many things that you took a vow about.
Right.
So I think it's just fascinating to me that, like, what place would a vow about nursing have, like, just in society in general? Like, why would that be like what a woman would take a vow about?
Yeah, I was very confused about that too. I did some research on it, came up kind of empty, but the only thing I found was that if you did make a vow to nurse or not to nurse, and in order to have it overturned, that was like one of the kol nidre kind of things you'd actually have to do a vow nullification ceremony. That words were considered very weighty. It wasn't just like what I was saying when I had Rivka, before I had Rivka, I'm not going to nurse no matter what. That wasn't a vow. I didn't have like a formula that I said and I swear I'm not going to. It was more just like, a very strongly held opinion. But a vow was something much more formal, and I'm not sure what would possess a woman to do that in either direction. So you raise a very good question. That's a tough one to address, I think. Mm-hmm. If you find out anything, Beth, let me know. Hello. Laura?
Other than a wet nurse, were there any alternatives?
I don't think they had formula per se, but I think there was definitely the idea of giving milk, actual milk, as opposed to something that's prepackaged. So we are in America. For sure, there's certain rules about the earliest age you can give whole milk to a child, and some moms and dads are more on the strict end, are more on the lenient end. They might give it a little earlier. I think we didn't give whole milk to our kids till about age 1, around there. But there, I think they might have been way more lenient about that. So it wasn't a matter of the child starving. Like it was a matter.
So there was a means to feed a child other than nursing.
Yes. I don't think it may not have been as common. Joanne.
I just want to say that I had my children on the East Coast in the 70s, and there was tremendous pressure to nurse.
Okay.
Tremendous.
Good.
In the 70s, yeah. Like I know I had my kids in the 90s in San Francisco, and in the 90s, the friends I had on the East Coast were like, the more career oriented you were, more educated you were, the less likely you were to nurse on the East Coast. And on the West Coast, at least where I was, I can't speak for all of California, but in the Bay Area, it was definitely the more educated you were, the wealthier you were, the more you would nurse. Or
someone actually, I was holding my child with a bottle someplace. I was working and I wasn't going to nurse. And I was feeding my child from a bottle, and somebody actually came up to me and said, "Why are you doing that? You obviously have plenty of milk."
You gotta love women. Okay. You think men are harsh on us. It's really the women who are the killers.
Yeah.
Right. Laura, go ahead.
There we go. Just as a counterpoint to that, I nursed both my children, but I also had, this is not the counterpoint part, but I had the same kind of issues of mastitis.
Yes, me too.
You had mentioned, and I was not as successful. I only for a short time was able to do it before I got very bad infections, but that wasn't the point I want to make. As a counterpoint, my mother tells me, I was born in 1949. My mother was a Holocaust survivor from Europe, and she expected to nurse her child because in Europe, everybody nursed their child. She tells the story that when she was in the hospital, I was the firstborn for her, that they would not allow her to nurse. They took the baby, meaning me, away, but they pumped her milk and fed it to the preemies.
Wow.
In the hospital.
Wow.
But they would not allow her to nurse because that was considered old-fashioned.
Right. That happened to my mom too.
Anne, did you want to say
too.
something? Okay, so let's go ahead to just one other thing about the length of time for nursing. So again, when in California in the 90s, not only was it expected that you would nurse, but you would nurse for a really long time. And people did have definitions of what very long time was, but one of my best friends nursed her child till he was 5. So, and you should know that the Talmud there is an opinion. One opinion is up until 24 months. That is kind of what they say the rabbis taught. So that's more like the majority view is nurse until 24 months. And Rabbi Eliezer concurred with that. But Rabbi Yehoshua said up to 4 or 5 years old. So clearly my friend Karen was in the Rabbi Yehoshua camp. I also have a friend on the East Coast who is a head of La Leche League chapter. And so I never knew her to be not nursing the entire time of her children. She sometimes nursed multiple children. She had 7 kids and every one of them was nursed. And yeah, so no matter what the norms are, there's always going to be someone who has their own way of doing it. I just think it's interesting that the Talmud has something to say about this. Now, if you look on page 11 of the handout, you can scroll, it's text number 6. This is a Gemara commentary on the part of the Mishnah that specifically said that even though a husband cannot compel a wife who's a divorced wife to nurse a child of theirs, he can compel her if the baby recognized her. And then there's a whole crazy little section here about a baby recognizing a mother and how does that happen. And they even ask the question of if a child is blind, how does that child recognize its mother? So if you look at the bottom of page 11, I'll read this. Ad kama. So the Gemara asks, how old does the child have to be so that one can assume that he already recognizes his mother? Rava said in the name of Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba, who said in the name of Rav, 3 months. And Shmuel said 30 days. And Rabbi Yitzchak said that Rabbi Yochanan said 50 days. So these are like the ages of when a child normally or on average would recognize his mother. And then Rav Shimi bar Abba says the halacha is in accordance with what Rabbi Yitzchak said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. That's the 50-day thing. But then it said, the Gemara asks, granted, Rav and Rabbi Yochanan are in dispute with regard to the difference between 50 days and 3 months. And it is possible that each baby varies according to its intelligence, as one baby is sufficiently developed at 50 days while another knows his mother at only 3 months. However, according to Shmuel, can you find a case like this, a 1-month-old baby who recognizes his mother? And the Gemara relates, when Rabbi Bar Yecheskel came from Eretz Yisrael, he said, do not listen to, that is, do not accept those principles that my brother Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel. As Shmuel did not establish a particular age with respect to that matter, rather, this is what Shmuel said, whenever he recognizes her. In other words, there's no fixed age at which this occurs. One must check each baby to see whether he recognizes his mother. And then they tell a story. So this is often the case in these sections of the Talmud that have this kind of hybrid of halacha and agadah, and this is what you should do as opposed to you must do this. And they have a little story, a maisa. The term Bava Metzia comes from this word maaseh that you find in the Talmud. So would someone like to read the story of the divorcee who came before Shmuel because she did not wish to nurse her son? It's on page 13. Ruth, did you want to read it?
Gemara relates, a certain divorcee came before Shmuel as she did not wish to nurse her son. He said to Rav Dimi bar Yosef, go and check her, in other words, verify whether the child recognizes his mother. He went, placed her in a row of women, and took her son in his arms and passed the I can't go down. Oh wait. And there.
Yes.
No. Okay. He went and placed her in a row of women and took her son in his arms and passed him near them to see how the child would react. When the child reached her, he looked at her face with joy, and she averted her eyes from him as she did not want to look at him. He said, lift up your eyes, get up and take your son, as it is obvious that he knows you.
Okay, stop right there.
Mhm.
So I found this story very disturbing. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's because the woman didn't want to nurse her son, but like I totally can relate to not wanting to nurse at certain points in my motherhood, or her, like, I don't know him. I don't know. What do you think of that story, and why do you think it's in the Talmud?
I don't know. It's she's divorced. It's her husband's son. Maybe she feels that with the son, it'll never be hers. It'll always be her husband's child.
Interesting.
I have relatives in Lakewood. I keep thinking of them because some of this relates to their lives in the ultra-Orthodox. And I can see where the boys really, at a certain age, they're only with their fathers, and she only has the girls.
Interesting. Right. So it could be an assertion of power in some way, her not wanting to nurse as a divorcee. It's not just a mother who's married not wanting to nurse. It's a mother who's divorced and doesn't feel like her child belongs to her anymore, or may not.
Right. Yeah, I see that.
Interesting. Okay, let's move on to just one more little, I'm going to skim through it, but I thought it was cute just to point out on page 14. This is also from the same tractate of the Gemara, Ketubot 60b. And while they're on the topic of nursing, they talk about these are foods you shouldn't eat while you're nursing. And by the way, since we're talking about nursing, here are foods you shouldn't eat while you're pregnant. And here are foods you should eat while you're pregnant. So it's not exactly like the doctor's list that you might have seen, or the next time you go to your OBGYN and are reading Lakewood stuff. What their list is, if it includes this, I don't know. But there are some pretty bizarre things on this list. The one thing they all have in common on page 14, it says Ravashi, all these items are bad as some cause milk to dry up and some cause milk to spoil. So, that's, I guess, a valid reason for not being able to eat certain things. But it goes on, I said, since they're on this discussion about nursing, they talk about pregnancy, but they also talk about just behaviors, how the behaviors of mothers affect their children, including where she has sex. Like there's this thing on page 15, it says a woman who engages in intercourse in a mill, like a flour mill, will have epileptic children. One who engages in intercourse on the ground will have long-necked children. It just kind of goes on from there. And I think the only thing on this list that's recognizable in terms of advice that we might get today from someone would be about drinking wine during pregnancy. Although here it seems to be a good thing, right? Like they're saying that it actually could be a healthy thing. That on the bottom of page 15, it says, one who eats meat and drinks wine during pregnancy will have children who are healthy. So a little bit different than what we're used to hearing. There's even a part here about women who eat etrogim will have sweet-smelling children. And of course, they have a maaseh with that, a story, a maaseh, that says, the daughter of King Shapur of Persia, her mother ate etrogim while pregnant with her, and they used to place her in front of her father on top of all the spices. That's how fragrant she was. They're trying to imagine this banquet with like a baby on top. Just very strange. Okay, so the Talmud has all kind of interesting tangents. One other tangent I wanted to show you before we go into something else is on page 25. And by the way, this is the way Gemara works. It's called Ketubot. It starts with a ketubah, kind of connected by talking about women's obligations to her husband with all those household duties. Then a debate about whether women really should be for household duties or whether they're for beauty or for children. Then it's stuff about nursing and pregnancy and all other things. And now there's a tangent about a very unusual marriage proposal. While we're on the topic of women and husbands, wives, page 25. So who would like to read this story of a certain Roman woman who said to another woman, who may or may not have been Roman? Who would like to read? Alice, would you like to read?
The text, I don't have the text in front of me.
Yeah, okay. Does someone have the text in front of them who would like to?
I have.
Yes.
Laura, go ahead.
A certain Roman said to a certain woman, "Will you marry me?" She said to him, "No." In order to convince her, he went and brought pomegranates and peeled them and ate them in front of her and did not give her any of them. The aroma of the pomegranates caused her mouth to water, so she swallowed all of the saliva that caused her anguish, but he did not give her any until she became ill and bloated. Ultimately, he said to her, "If I cure you, will you marry me?" She said to him, "Yes." He went and brought pomegranates, peeled them, and ate them in front of her. He said to her, "All of the saliva that causes you anguish, spit it out, spit it out." She did this until something like a green leaf came out of her, and then she was cured.
Okay, did
What
anyone have
is that?
did anyone have a proposed story like that? Now, there's a story. Joanne is looking mighty skeptical, which is understandable. Okay, I don't even know what to make of that, and clearly it doesn't have like major halakhic implications, but it's a nice little diversion there. Okay, the last thing I wanted to do on this topic here, relating to women's obligations to their husband before we shift to husbands' obligations to their wives, is on page 27 in this handout. It's text number 14. It starts at the bottom of page 27, and it's Ketubot 61b. And it's referring back to the part of the Mishnah where we had that debate between the two rabbis as to whether when a woman has multiple maids, I think it was four, she has so many maids that she doesn't have to do anything. But these two rabbis still say, yeah, but she still should, because if she is idle, that's not a good thing. It will either, one rabbi says it will lead to licentiousness, and the other one said it will lead to idiocy, insanity, or boredom, depending on how you want to translate the word shiamum. So this is now going to be a Gemara unpacking commentary of that Mishnah. So starting at the bottom of 27, where it says, the Gemara asks, this is essentially the same, next page, as the opinion of the first Tana, Rabbi Eliezer, who said that idleness leads to licentiousness. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to say something else. So could someone read that, the practical difference? I think, Anne, you wanted to read before.
I'm sorry, I'm starting at the Gemara answers. Right?
Yeah.
Gemara answers, the practical difference between them is in a case when she plays with small dogs or with games like chess. Since there is something occupying her, she's not in danger of idiocy or insanity, but occupying oneself with diversions of this type may still lead to licentiousness.
Okay, so what do we think about these small dogs and the chess? This is just to make it clear what these two rabbis, go ahead, somebody want to say something?
Well, so small dogs is like silly play, silly occupation, and chess is mental occupation. So either way, it's okay.
Right, because at least she's not idle.
She's not idle.
This idea of women being idle is bad, and it doesn't matter if she's, I don't know, playing games or doing stupid stuff or doing important stuff, but who knows? Like you could also, I don't know if they thought of playing with dogs as a stupid thing and checkers as like a high-minded thing, or both of them in the category of kind of trivial things that are mindless. To me, chess sounds very, you need a mind for that. I have another translation of the Talmud here that says checkers instead of chess. Checkers doesn't take as much mental energy as chess, but it's still, you have to have something going on. So it's not really clear. What I did want to read to you what Rabbi Adin Steinzold says about this, and it's very interesting. He says, as long as the woman keeps herself occupied with something, no matter how trivial, even if it's just with pets or just with games, she will not be led to insanity. But she may still be led to promiscuity if she does not engage in some constructive activity. So, according to Rabbi Eliezer, who's the one who says that idleness leads to licentiousness, he says a woman is required to do some household chore. So even, so forget about just playing with dogs or just playing chess or checkers. A woman, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is required to spin wool, even if she brought 100 maidservants to her marriage. But according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that the only problem with being idle is that she'll be bored or go insane, he says, a woman whose personal quota of work can be met by her maidservants is not required to spin any wool, provided that she can keep herself busy with something, no matter how trivial. So they're both viewing like the pets and game things as Trivial, I don't know. I'm a recent dog owner. I don't find taking care of a dog to be trivial, but then again, who am I to say? Right? Joanne, you're a dog owner, right? What do you think? We're a dog owner.
It's not trivial.
Right. It's not trivial. And chess certainly isn't trivial. I don't get chess. I wish I did, but I don't even get mahjong. So like it, or checkers for that matter. So I don't think it's, yeah, but somehow the rabbis had this idea. Okay, so we're going to shift now from wives' obligations or responsibilities to husbands' responsibilities to wives, lest you think that husbands are completely off the hook. So bottom of 28, would someone like to read this? It's still from Masechet Ketubot. It's Ketubot 61b. Do I see someone who hasn't read?
What page was it again?
It's page 28, but it's text number 15. It has a 15 and it starts at the bottom of page 28. Does anyone see it? Okay, Sandy Finkelstein.
Okay. Students may leave their homes and travel in order to learn Torah without their wives' permission for up to 30 days. And laborers may leave their homes without their wives' permission for up to 1 week. The set interval defining the frequency of a husband's conjugal obligation to his wife stated in the Torah, unless the couple stipulated otherwise, varies according to the man's occupation and proximity to his home. Men of leisure who do not work must engage in marital relations every day.
Good.
Okay, keep working. Laborers must do so twice a week. Donkey drivers once a week. Camel drivers once every 30 days. Could drive a camel. And sailors once every 6 months. Ahoy, matey!
This is this is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. Okay. All right. So this whole Mishnah here is very interesting. You know, we talk about wives' obligations to their husbands. It's all about household chores. And some rabbis, of course, said it's not about the chores. It's about their beauty and about children. And here we're going right for sex, right? And it's not, maybe counterintuitive to some people, but it seems like here in the Talmud and Jewish tradition, it's the man's obligation to have sex with the wife, not the other way around. Now, I don't know if this was the reality of the situation or this was the rabbi's wishful thinking. Who knows? Maybe this was their rabbinic fantasy. But in any event, they felt they needed to, with halakha, which does govern every aspect of life. The word halakha, Jewish law, means the way you walk. So it means everything from the way you walk, the way you go to the bathroom, having sex. All of this has parameters around it. And men, you can't use excuses to just stay away from your wives. In fact, I don't know how many of you, go ahead, Sandy.
I just have a question because isn't it supposed to be a mitzvah on Shabbat? So
yes. Yes, it's supposed to be a mitzvah on Shabbat, right? The double mitzvah of having sex on Shabbat with your husband. Yes, so that would be something that goes in conflict with this. There's a lot of conflicting voices in the Talmud. Interesting, it doesn't come up in this section of the Talmud. It's a much later teaching, but yeah, that certainly wouldn't work for the ahoy matey sailors or the camel drivers. It could work for the donkey drivers, and yeah, it's like too frequent for the sailors and the camel drivers, but way too frequent for the men of leisure, the retired men, right? Yes, Leroy, Risa. I'm reading the screen, and I'm like,
Yeah, I don't look like Leroy.
No.
But what you have here, if you compare it with the women's idleness. Mm-hmm. If you're idle and have nothing to do, it can lead to licentiousness. Mm-hmm. And if you're wealthy and have nothing to do, you also have a problem. So you better go to your wife and don't go someplace else.
Interesting. Okay, so both of them have some kind of...
There's a problem with having too much time on your hands.
Yes, exactly. They didn't like the idea of idleness. And there also was an issue of people of means or not, right? People who were not of means, they couldn't afford to be men of leisure. And so there were different laws to them, just how women who were not of means and didn't marry someone who was of means, they didn't bring maids, they didn't have maids, and they therefore had to do more, their responsibilities were greater. Laura?
Oh, yes, I'm focusing on the beginning part of what was read. This shocked me that the wives have to give permission to the husbands to leave. They decide all of a sudden they have power here.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, very different than what there was pointed out earlier by a few of you, most notably Betty Ann, you had said earlier about power, who has the power and who could compel. And here there's a lot of power put in the wife's hands in terms of letting her husband go. I remember as a kid, when I was growing up, I lived on East 9th Street between L&M and Brooklyn in a two-family house. And our kitchen was in an alley facing another two-family house. So our kitchen faced their kitchen, and we would hear all of the conversations in the house. And they oftentimes were not conversations, they were arguments. And I honestly never saw these people in my life because I was scared to see either one of them. So, because he would always say, "You spent money on what? You spent money on what?" And I imagined this like big bully guy like terrorizing his wife. And the number of times I was thinking, God, I should really call the police on them. I don't hear any hitting going on there, but this still is some kind of abuse. And this idea of him letting her buy things, giving her permission to buy things. And here now you have this language of wife giving permission to the husband to study. Like, it's a very interesting thing. I wonder, how that's playing in Lakewood circles, since we keep bringing up Lakewood. Yes, Lisa.
But doesn't that go along with the marital relations, that you can't leave me for so long?
Right. But it's up to her. It's not about him having the sexual need or obligation or desire. The mitzvah on men, according to Jewish law.
But he's obligated to have sex with her.
Yeah.
So if he's obligated, she has to say, well, it's okay for 30 days that you go away and don't have sex with me.
Right. Right. Which does
give permission not to fulfill your obligation.
Right, but it seems like it's a competing set of obligations. In fact, what you see a lot in the Talmud, not just in this section, but I'll show you some text. If you move to the other text, click on the other link now, the Love Babylonian Style. Some of you may have seen these texts if you studied with me at Tikkun Leil Shavuot last year. But there was a big tension in rabbinic times between two competing sets of obligations, and even two competing sets of desires. On the one hand, there was an obligation to have sex with your wife. There were conjugal rights that wives had. And on the other hand, there was this obligation to study Torah. On the one hand, there was a desire to have sex with your wife. So libido and all of that, and just sexual attractiveness and attraction to your wife. And then on the other hand, there was the desire to study Torah. And this ambivalence, this tension plays itself out in the rabbinic text. So if you look in this next text sheet that I provided, the Love Babylonian Style, it had on the first page, it has the Mishnah that we just read. So you can ignore that because we just did that. Now, if you go to the next page, it's all Hebrew and Aramaic. So let's skip that. We'll just do it in the English, and I'll bring in Hebrew as needed or Aramaic as needed. If you go to page 4, what I have here as it's B, and the letters and numbers that I have here are according to an outline that Professor Jeffrey Rubenstein used to outline this sugya of Talmud. So would someone like to read, starting with Rav Ada bar Ahava? It's the second little section. So Rav Barona is on top of the page, and then the next is Rav Ada bar Ahava. Ruth, would you like to read that?
Sure. Rav Barona said that Rav said, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rav Ada bar Ahava said that Rav said, this is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. Is it Eliezer or Eliezer?
It's Eliezer. There's two names that are very close, Eliezer and Elazar, and the Yiddish version of Eliezer is often Laser, like Laser Wolf. This is Eliezer, yeah.
Okay. But the rabbis say students may leave their homes to study Torah for as long as 2 or 3 years without permission from their wives. Rava said the sages relied on Rabbi Ada bar Ahava's opinion and performed an action like this themselves, but the results were sometimes fatal.
Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so just to remind you, Rabbi Eliezer, his opinion is all the stuff we read in the Mishnah, and Rabbi Eliezer had said that people who study Torah, rabbis, etc., or students, rabbinical students, they could leave without their wife's permission for up to 30 days, but this Rav Ada bar Ada bar Ahava, in the name of Rav, he extends the period that without wife's permission for up to 2 to 3 years. Okay, which really is a much longer period of separation than just 30 days. And then Rava says, yeah, you can follow this extended period of time away from your wife, but there are consequences to your actions. In other words, don't stay far away from your wife. So in this little interchange here, we're having the value of Torah study outweighing the value of staying with your wife and fulfilling your conjugal obligations. And then on the other hand, because look what's going to happen. And in case you want to know what could happen, these next stories that are in the Talmud in this section that are on the text sheet starting on page 4, they do show some of these negative consequences of what happens if you stay away from your wife for too long, that there could be, even if they're not fatal, they're not so great. So would someone like to read story number 1? Story about Rav Rahumi. Judy?
Okay, this is as it related about Rav Rahumi, who had commonly studied before Rav in Mehoza. He was accustomed to come back to his home every year on the eve of Yom Kippur. One day, he was particularly engrossed in the halakha he was studying, and so he remained in the study hall and did not go home. His wife was expecting him that day and continually said to herself, now he is coming, now he is coming. But in the end, he did not come. She was distressed by this, and a tear fell from her eye. At that exact moment, Rav Rahumi was sitting on the roof. The roof collapsed under him, and he died. This teaches us how much one must be careful, as he was punished severely for causing anguish to his wife, even inadvertently.
Okay, so this really makes us see. We looked at that Bava Metzia text earlier about be careful about not hurting your wife's feelings. It didn't tell you what the consequences were as like this, right? This is really bad. It's not that she dies, he dies, right? So be careful. Yes, you have an obligation to Torah study, but your wife comes first. Okay, and if you go to story number 2, we're going to skip that E section just for time. I'm very popular today. Okay, all right. Go ahead.
It is related under story 2 there, F1.
F1, yeah.
It is related further that Yehuda, son of Rabbi Hayya, and his son-in-law, Rabbi Yani, would go and sit in the study hall. And every Shabbat Eve at twilight, he would come home to his house. When he would come, Rabbi Yani would see a pillar of fire preceding him due to his sanctity.
Keep going because we got to see what happens.
Okay, story 3.
It's still story 2, so we haven't finished story 2. Story 2 is 2 parts. One is the first part. Yeah.
One day he was engrossed in the halakha he was studying. His studies captivated him, and he stayed in the study hall and did not return home. When Rabbi Yani did not see that the sign preceding him, he said to his family, turn his bed over, and one does not at times of mourning, since he must have died, reasoning that if Yehuda were alive, he would not have missed his set interval for conjugal relations and would certainly have come home. What he said became like an arrow that precedes him from a ruler, and Yehuda, son of Rabbi Yahina, died.
Okay, so bottom line is he died.
It's pretty serious.
Yeah, it's pretty serious. So this was just due to a tragic misunderstanding, right? The first one is because of pain caused to his wife. That's why Rav Rahumi dies. And in this second story, it's not because of pain caused to his wife. And he actually, because the sign was not there, there was this misunderstanding. And so it also ends up in death. If you turn to the next page, page 5, another kind of deleterious, I don't know if that's the way to pronounce it, detrimental consequence, something negative that happens as a result of spending too much time studying Torah and neglecting your wife. In this one, in story 3, it's G, there's going to be someone who dies. In G2, we have somebody who becomes, look at G3. Okay, so it's too long to read the whole thing right now. Joanne, do you want to read it after his wedding? we're on page 5, and I just skipped G1 and G2. And we're talking about the Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi's daughter-in-law after the wedding to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi's.
You're muted, Joanne. Joanne is muted.
I'm not muted.
Not anymore. She's good.
Okay. All right. So after his wedding, he went and sat?
Yes.
Okay. After his wedding, he went and sat for 12 years in the study hall. By that time, his behind was flat, but by the time he came back, his wife had become infertile as a consequence of spending so many years without her husband. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi said, "What shall we do? If he will divorce her, people will say, this poor woman waited and hoped for naught. And if he will marry another woman to beget children, people will say, this one who bears him children is his wife, and that one who lives with him is his mistress." Therefore, her husband pleaded with God to have mercy on her, and she was cured.
Wait. Yes.
How did they know she was infertile?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know if you were reading the same thing I had in front of me. I feel like I skipped pages. Give me a second.
It's at the bottom of story 3, I think.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. All right. So she became infertile, right? So it's not, it is a very negative consequence. It's not death. We're going to see another one. I think my eye had skipped already to story 4. So Joanne, why don't you go ahead and read story 4 as well? Rabbi
Wait a minute. Did that infertile mean that she slipped into menopause? Is that how they knew that she was infertile? How would they know?
It's interesting. They don't mention that because the rabbis didn't necessarily have a very good command of women's bodies, but it didn't necessarily stop them from talking about it. But as whatever. We're not sure if it was. The way it's worded here in the English translation is that his wife had become infertile, which to me sounds like you become menopausal, right? Or it could just be that she got older and had fewer eggs, or it could be divine punishment as viewed from the eyes of the rabbis. So we're not really sure if it was menopause or how young she was. Even though he sat and studied in the study hall, the Beit Midrash, for 12 years, she may have been 19 when she got married, so it may have been way too early for menopause. So we don't know.
Maybe she just didn't get pregnant in the first 3 months, and they figured if you're not pregnant in 3 months, you must be infertile.
You must be infertile, right? That's another thing. So all of those things are suggestions. Does it change it for you, Joanne, if there's any of these different outcomes?
No.
Right. So yeah, it's just interesting to look at. And one more story number 4, with Rabbi Hanania ben Hakinai. There's also going to be a bad end. In this case, a woman whose husband goes away and studies for a long time, her heart flutters with agitation. And the English says she passed away from the emotional stress, but the Aramaic is that her heart fluttered and, let me find the exact wording. Story 4. Here we go. It says parach rucha. Okay, her ruach, her spirit, kind of flew out of her body, like burst out, blossomed out of her body, which is usually a euphemism for dying. But as it turns out, he pleads for her and she lived. So it's either she died and she was resurrected, or she really just plotted, fainted, whatever it was some negative effect that happened to the woman. And it all ends up okay in the end. It's a happy ending, but still there's a warning to rabbis of not forgetting your scene. And if the Gemara ended right here, I think our sense of how rabbis viewed their wives and how they viewed that tension between Torah study and obligations to their wives, it certainly would seem like the rabbis are warning themselves, don't forget your wives, don't spend too much time in Talmud study. But the Gemara doesn't end there. The Gemara goes on. We're going to look at story number 6. For those of you this is on page 6. For those of you who do want to read story number 5, it's a very heart-wrenching story about a rabbi who's away for so long he doesn't even recognize his children. So there's all kind of things that happen. It's not just the wife who dies or the husband dies or the wife is barren or menopausal or whatever. It's also just the heartbreaking reality of not knowing your child because you're away from them for too long. But in story 6, we have what he's not a rabbi, Professor Jeffrey Rubenstein, he refers to this story as rabbinic fantasy. It's the have your cake and eat it too scenario of Torah study and your wife. So who would like to read story number 6? And this does feature Rabbi Akiva and Rachel, although I don't think her name is actually mentioned in here. Famous story. Linda, would you like to read it? J1, the Gemara further relates.
The Gemara further relates, Rabbi Akiva was the shepherd of Ben Kalba Suava.
Savua. So savua means sated, like satiated. If you know the grace after meals, Birkat Hamazon, there's a part that quotes from the Torah, the mitzvah, V'achalta v'savata uveirachta. You shall eat, you shall be satisfied, satiated, and then you shall bless. That same word for satisfied, satiated is savua. So his name, Ben Kalba Savua, it's like a satisfied dog, someone who has a lot. He was a very, very wealthy man.
Yes, one of the wealthy residents of Jerusalem. The daughter of Ben Kalba Savua saw that he was humble and refined.
Talking about Rabbi Akiva, not about her father.
She said to him, if I betroth myself to you, will you go to the study hall to learn Torah? He said to her, yes. She became betrothed to him privately and sent him off to study. Her father heard this and became angry. He removed her from his house and took a vow prohibiting her from benefiting from his property.
Okay, so basically he disowned her. Okay, so in this case, it's you have the father really being very protective of his daughter and very angry at the husband who puts Torah study ahead of his wife. But I call this, and Dr. Rubenstein calls this rabbinic fantasy, because it's the wife who's telling him to go study. It's not going to study without your wife's permission or having to choose between one and the other. You have the perfect woman. She begs you to leave. She begs you to go study Torah. Okay, but the story doesn't end there. It gets better. So Rabbi Akiva went.
Rabbi Akiva went and sat for 12 years in the study hall. When he came back to his house, he brought 12,000 students with him. And as he approached, he heard an old man saying to his wife, for how long will you lead the wife of a widow of a living man, living alone while your husband is in another place? She said to him, if he would listen to me, he would sit and study for another 12 years.
Oy, Nachamal.
When Rabbi Akiva heard this, he said, I have permission to do this.
Right, and you realize she didn't say this to him, he overheard it.
He went back and sat for another 12 years in the study hall.
Okay, things still looking good. Nobody's dying, nobody's barren, we don't think. J3.
When he came back, he brought 24,000 students with him. His wife heard and went out toward him to greet him. Her neighbor said, borrow some clothes and wear them, as your current apparel is not appropriate to meet an important person. She said to them, a righteous man understands the life of his beast. When she came to him, she fell on her face and kissed his feet. His attendants pushed her away, as they did not know who she was. And he said to them, leave her alone, as my Torah knowledge and yours is actually hers.
Aww. Keep going. In the
meantime, her father heard that a great man came to the town. He said, I will go to him. Maybe he will nullify my vow and I will be able to support my daughter.
See the importance of vows again, this formula of you make a vow, it's really important. He disowned his daughter and he was never able to go back on it without nullification.
He came to him to ask about nullifying his vow, and Rabbi Akiva said to him, did you vow thinking that this Akiva would become a great man? He said to him, if I had believed he would know even one chapter or even one halakha, I would not have been so harsh. He said to him, I am he. Then Kalba Savua fell on his face and kissed his feet and gave him half of his money.
Okay, so there, talk about happy ending in that one. So completely turning around all those other stories, and there were many of them. There were, before we got to story 6, right, we had 5 full stories of how Torah study, as good as it is not as important as being there for your wife. And you can't disappear from home for all this time. And here you have this rabbinic fantasy of having it all, right? You have this, he had years of uninterrupted study, many years, right? 24 years of study. thousands of students, status, and he even ends up with wealth at the end. So he really took his cake and the icing and the cherry and the whipped cream, everything. He ends up with it all. And again, the Gemara could end right here, and then you'd think, oh, okay, so that's what the rabbis think about the tension between obligations and desire for Torah study versus women, wives, and obligations to their wives. But the Gemara has one more thing to say, and it leaves us with a very bizarre ending, if you were to say, almost like a bottom line. The Talmud doesn't usually have bottom lines. Let's see if we can try to discern from this on which edge of this tension the rabbis end up in this part of the Talmud. So who would like to read story number 7? Risa?
On the same subject, excuse me, it is related. Rav Yosef, son of Rava, was sent by his father to the study hall to learn before the great sage Rav Yosef. They agreed that he should sit for 6 years in the study hall. When 3 years had passed, the eve of Yom Kippur arrived, and he said, I will go and see the members of my household, meaning his wife. His father heard and took a weapon as if he were going to war and went to meet him. According to one version, he said to him, do you remember your mistress as you are abandoning your studies to see a woman? There are those who say that he said to him, do you remember your dove? Since both father and son were involved in an argument, they were preoccupied, and this man did not eat the final meal before the Yom Kippur fast, and that man also did not eat the final meal before Yom Kippur that day.
Okay, what does this story come to teach us? Because this is the last word on this topic in the Gemara. So we don't end on the Rabbi Akiva, Rachel, rabbinic fantasy. We don't end on the pileup of stories of look out if you abandon your wife and spend too much time studying Torah and neglect your conjugal responsibilities. Look at Achan Vei, look what will happen to you. What do we have here?
It sounds like the father is saying that the Torah is more important than his wife.
Yeah, very different than the father of the father-in-law of Rabbi Akiva, right? Kalba Savua, he was the one who got angry kind of on his wife's behalf, even though she, maybe not realizing she had given permission, but thinking about his wife's best interest. The father there said, no, wife is more important than Torah study. Here, I guess because it's the father of the son, not of the daughter, but the father's putting way more emphasis on obligations to Torah, and in fact refers to the wife as a mistress. Right? In that line that Risa read, according to one version, he said to him, did you remember your mistress? In Hebrew, it actually doesn't say mistress, it says zonatcha. A zonah is a prostitute, whore. So you're giving more emphasis and paying more attention to that whore of a wife of yours instead of your true wife, who is the wife of Torah study. Okay, that is that the bottom line of this Gemara, or does it keep going?
It keeps going.
Yeah, so what happens next? Does someone else want to comment on it? Ruth?
This is what, studying this kind of stuff is what eventually turned my father away from religion for a while. He did come back, but it's just so ridiculous to think that your obligations to marriage are not important, and that you can dismiss one thing in the Torah in place of another. I just didn't think it worked that way.
Okay, I think what your father and how he understood it works very well with perhaps with the Rabbi Akiva story, and certainly the part that Risa read up until the mistress line. But the next line there's another understanding of how the story went, and it's about, did you remember your dove versus did you remember your mistress? How does that change the force of that story? Sandy Finkelstein, did you want to say something? No. Risa, did you? I saw a hand in that corner.
Yeah.
Maybe it was
I was going to comment on the part that comes after that, because I'm a little confused by the dove. It's a more gentle word, certainly, than mistress or prostitute. But it ended up that they were both wrong, because they both missed the Erev Yom Kippur meal, and they both have to go without eating. And I think it was like a curse on both your houses. You're both wrong.
Yes. So, Ruth, if only your dad had read through the end of the story. Sometimes it's very, I think I see all the time articles that say, the Talmud is very anti-women. It's a misogynist document, and you can certainly find plenty of evidence for that. And then you'll see other articles that say, no, it's a feminist document, and look at all the ways in which it's feminist. Judith Hauptman wrote an entire book about that, about rereading the rabbis and looking through Talmudic stories about how positive the view of women was in the Talmud. And then you have a story like this, which really shows this ambivalence. The mistress line is very harsh. It's the father's point of view, right? The father's point of view is saying Torah study is more important than your wife. Your wife is nothing more than a whore, a mistress compared to Torah, who's your true wife. But then that other way of saying it, the gentler, did you remember your dove? A dove is kind of symbol of a beloved object of affection. And we're not sure if it's the father used that terminology or the son referred to his wife that way. Either way, it's putting the wife and the obligations to the wife ahead of Torah study. And the Torah, but the Talmud doesn't end there. It has one more thing to say. And this last part about how neither of them were able to eat the meal before the fast, no, that's not the worst thing in the world compared to, say, death or infertility, but it is a negative consequence, and they both lose. Right? As Risa pointed out, neither one emerges as a victor in this one. I'm going to read to you what I keep calling him Rabbi. Maybe he should become a rabbi and just put me out of my misery here. Jeff Rubenstein, he's a professor at NYU. And he says that the two argue, though it is the eve of Yom Kippur and neglect to eat the final meal, leaves us with a picture of stalemate. Just as the father and son could not resolve their quarrel and move ahead, so this fundamental cultural tension cannot be resolved completely. The intractable argument is a fitting conclusion to a cycle of stories that grapple with this issue. So that's where we're going to end with this topic, and we're going to end today with is just brief look at where we are on the women and the Talmud, because I think this is our last class of this series, and then I wanted to get some input in what you might want to do next year. So let me just share a screen with you that we had up before. Why can I find it? Okay, so first this. Okay. So this is what I've showed at the beginning usually of most of the classes, just a refresher that Mishnah plus Gemara equals Talmud. Do you recognize the names of the tractates that we studied today? Can you see which order it's in? Does anyone see it? Is it in Zeraim? Is it in Moed, Nashim, Nizikim, Kodashim, or Toharot? Okay, so Nizikim, so that's the name of the order, one of the 6 orders. What was the name of the tractate that we studied, the very first one that had all the advice from your wife, not to take advice from your
Bava Metzia.
Yeah, Bava Metzia. So that's this one right here, Bava Metzia. That was the same tractate where we studied about Ima Shalom and Rabbi Eliezer and Ban Gamliel last time. Okay, and then this whole long spiel about nursing and women's obligations to their husband, and then husbands' obligations to their wives, and the tension between Torah study and obligations and desire for your wife. Which order does that appear in? It's not in Nizikim.
That's in Ketubot.
Okay, so Ketubot is the name of the tractate, and the name of that order is Nashim, which means women. So if you look at the names of all the tractates in Seder Nashim, they all have something that has to do either with women per se or the marital relationship. Yivamot, Yibum means a levirate marriage. That's when a wife is, when a woman is required to marry her deceased husband's brother in order to have children. That's what Yevamot is about. Ketubot, what we just read, wedding contracts. Nidarim, vows. So there's a whole thing about women's vows in particular and who has the power to nullify a woman's vow. Nazir is Nazarites, which doesn't have anything to do with women per se, but since it has to do with a vow, I think it emerges from the discussion about Nidarim, so they somehow got plunked into this order called Nashim. Sota is the woman suspected of adultery. Gitin is divorce documents. A get is singular. And Kiddushin comes from the same word as Kiddush, Kadosh. That's what a marriage ceremony is called. It's called Kiddushin because a marriage ceremony is very much holy matrimony. It's not just an emotional or transactional or economic relation. It's also a spiritual union. So we did a little bissel of this, probably a little more than a bissel of Ketubot, a little bissel of Bava Metzia. And the last thing I wanted to share was that timeline again. I don't know if you have the timeline or let me see if I can find it. Here it is. Okay, and I'll share screen and do a quick boom. Okay, so we didn't look at all the women, but we did, first class, we did Bruria. She's right here. She's the one who's married to Rabbi Meir, okay, somewhere here in the 2nd century CE. We studied Yalta. She was the wife of Rav Nachman, and Ula was the guy who dissed her at her own, who wouldn't give her the cup of blessing. That's Yalta, 3rd century. We also looked at the wife of Rabbi Hanina. That was the very first class that we did in the series, I think. No, maybe it was the second, I don't remember. We did Ima Shalom last time. That was in Masachet Bava Metzia, 80 to 110c. We did not get to Beloria or Barta Bat Baitos. If you want references for that, I'm happy to share with you. There wasn't as much to say about either of them. Sometimes there's not much to say about women in the Talmud because the men talk much more about their own spiel. But I did want you to get a little bit of a taste of what women in the Talmud was, both in terms of protagonists, like Yalta, Bruria, Ima Shalom, and Rachel, who we say today, Rachel, wife of Rabbi Akiva, as well as some of the more general issues that concern women. So I'm going to leave it at that and ask you if you have any comments or if you have any suggestions for what you might like to see in this series for next year.